I never thought I'd find myself job hunting at the age of 19 with nothing but a duffel bag and a rapidly dwindling sense of humor. Life wasn't handing me lemons, it was hurling them. But every clown's makeup runs sometimes, right? When I stumbled upon the ad for the Carnival position, it seemed like a joke fate was playing just for me. So I laughed, called the number, and 2 days later, I was employed at Carnival Rervour, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while passing on the highway. My interview was brief, conducted by a man named Mr. Ducroix, who somehow managed the balance between a promoted carny and an undertaker in demeanor. Gray swept through his hair like fog rolling over a graveyard, and his eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that slices through the usual pleasantries to pin you like a butterfly specimen. His office was a creaky, portable cabin tucked behind the carousel. Outside, the late afternoon sun threw shadows that played over the brightly painted horses, while inside, his single dusty light bulb swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel, casting more gloom than glow. "You'll start tomorrow," he said, his voice gravel and honey. He slid a piece of paper across the desk to me. "These are the rules you must follow, without exception," he added, tapping the paper as if it were a sacred text. Rule 1 was simple enough. No personal questions. You don't ask them, and you don't answer them. It seemed isolated enough, quirky even, in the sort of way that had me conjuring images of secret lives as spies or fugitive circus performers. The rest of the rules were a script of sorts. Always smile at Mrs. Lavend. Ignore Benny the squeak. Never walk between the Hall of Mirrors and the Ferris wheel alone after sunset. Always check your shoes before putting them on in the morning. Never, ever stay past midnight. Okay, I thought, partially amused and partially unnerved. Circuses were quirky, but this felt off, like reading a child's rules for a make-believe game where the stakes were oddly high. I decided to let my curiosity sleep on a thin cot in another portable cabin that reeked of mildew and candy floss. That first night, as I drifted off, the distant laughter and mechanical whir of rides seemed normal enough. But by morning, the wrongness began. The first minor off moment came when I met Mrs. Lavend. She operated the popcorn stand, where she drowned kernels in butter and layered them with a smile that could outshine the sun. Rule 1. Always smile at Mrs. Lavend. Her return smile was warm but looked pasted on, her eyes flickering like she was watching horror rerun behind my head. "Lovely day, isn't it?" she said, her voice too chipper. "Yeah, gorgeous," I nodded, the taste of artificial butter heavy in the air, mixing strangely with a faint, inexplicable scent of decay. That was another thing, the smells. The carnival should have smelled like popcorn, cotton candy, and excitement, but occasionally I caught whiffs of something sour and old, like forgotten laundry left to fester. I mentioned it to Keith, a ride operator who just chuckled and shook his head. "It's just the swamp gas, probably. This place is built on marshland," he explained, shrugging as if that summed up and dismissed the entirety of the fetid aroma lingering around us. Rule 2 about Benny, the squeak, was harder to ignore. Benny looked about 8 years old, perpetually in a striped shirt that was several sizes too big. He appeared at odd corners of the carnival, always silent, launching scathing looks whenever I caught his eye. I learned quickly that addressing him only earned scorn from my coworkers. Ignore Benny the squeak. But why? My days turned into a rhythm of unease, punctuated by odd rules and odder occurrences. The walk between the Hall of Mirrors and the Ferris wheel felt unnaturally cold, and checking my shoes each morning seemed like a paranoid ritual, until I found a dead, dried-out frog in my left sneaker one day. But the real dread settled in as my shift ended late one evening. The rule of never staying past midnight hummed in my head like a forgotten tune as I realized my watch had stopped working. The usual cacophony of the carnival had dimmed to a surreal silence, and my footsteps sounded overly loud against the gravel. Then behind the hall of mirrors I heard it, the low, plaintive cry of an animal in distress, or perhaps a child. As I moved closer, the sound dissolved into the whistle of the wind, a natural explanation, surely. But then, why did every instinct scream that something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong? In the dim light, I finally saw it. Shapes, not quite shadows, not quite solid, twisted slowly between the mirrors, beckoning with a grotesque allure. As they twisted, the air around me seemed to grow colder, the scant light flickering as if the heart of the room itself beat frantically in fear. The figures, indistinct yet chillingly familiar, continued they. Our silent dance, stretching elongated limbs to unfathomable lengths, fingers brushing against the glass, leaving trails of mist that swirled and pulsed. I stepped closer, my breath condensing in the air before me, and reached out tentatively. A part of me, the part less touched by reason, needed to feel the cool glass to assure myself of its reality. My fingers trembled as they neared the mirror, and that's when I heard it. A whisper just over my shoulder, so faint I might have imagined it, "Don't." I spun around, heart leaping to my throat, but there was nothing. Only the rows of mirrors and the dim, flickering light that seemed to mock my fright. A trick of the mind, I reassured myself, it must be. Yet, as I turned back to the mirror, the shape had shifted closer, its form more defined, a parody of human, emaciated, with gaping mouth and hollowed eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. The urge to run was primal, but my feet betrayed me, rooted in place by a mixture of dread and irresistible fascination. The shape's mouth moved, a slow, inexorable opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air on land. No sound came, yet the message was clear and horrifyingly personal, "Come closer, asterisk." I should have left then, should have turned and fled the grim dance hall of distorted reflections, but instead, I whispered, "What are you?" As if understanding would grant me some semblance of control or protection. It responded not in words, but in a sudden surge forward, its face pressing against the inside of the mirror, the glass flexing like a bubble under the strain. I staggered back, heart pounding a staccato beat against my ribs, fear slicking my palms. The light flickered more violently, shadows dancing like mad puppets against the walls. The air grew oppressively thick, charged with a static that crawled across my skin, pricking at my nerves. The shapes in all the mirrors now watched me, dozens of hollow eyes fixed in grotesque interest. I turned to the main door, the exit somehow seeming miles away, not the mere 20 strides I'd counted on my way in. Each step felt like wading through an invisible morass that clung and clawed at my legs. Halfway to the door, a shrill, keening sound split the air, emanating from the mirrors. It was not just a sound, but a physical force, vibrating through the floor and the walls, pulling at the very air I breathed. I covered my ears, eyes squeezed shut, and when I dared to look again, the space had changed. The mirrors now showed not only the twisted shapes, but scenes, flashes of places I recognized. My childhood home, the old, gnarled tree in the backyard, the hidden alcove in the attic where I'd hide as a boy. Each scene morphed and twisted, the familiar made malevolent. This was not merely a room, but a cavity of memories and fears, each mirror a portal to a part of my life I had locked away. The familiarity of the images served only to heighten the terror, making my very past seem out to ensnare me. Breathing hard, I continued toward the door, my mind reeling, trying to place the semblance of logic where there was none. As I reached for the handle, a cold gust swept through the hall, extinguishing the lights altogether. In the sudden, absolute dark, I felt a touch, light as a feather, yet unmistakably human, on my shoulder. I whirled around, my breath sharp and ragged, and as my eyes adjusted, the dim emergency lights flickered on, illuminating the horrid realization. There was no one there, just me, reflected in a mirror that hadn't been there before. My own eyes stared back at me, wide with primal terror, as behind me, in the reflection, the door shut silently on its own. My pulse hammered in my throat as I watched the door click shut in the mirror. Where had that mirror come from? The smooth, cold surface seemed to amplify the chill seeping into my bones, the room growing colder by the second. I moved forward, my steps hesitant, my eyes never leaving my own reflection. Somehow, the familiarity of my face provided a scant comfort, even as each slow step echoed unnervingly in the tight space. Inching closer to the mirror, my eyes scanned the room behind me in the reflection. Every detail appeared as it should, except for the unnaturally closed door and the newly manifested mirror. Reaching out, my fingers trembled as they touched the cool glass, half expecting it to ripple like water. It didn't. Solid and unyielding, it only reaffirmed the stark reality of the situation. Turning my head slightly, I evaluated the door again. No shadows moved beneath it, no sounds came from the other side. Just silence, a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to weigh on my eardrums. I glanced back at my reflection, a thought niggling at my mind. My eyes darted around the perimeter of the mirror, searching for any sign of how it was affixed to the wall. Nothing. It simply sat flush against the surface, as if it had always been part of the room. A shiver traveled down my spine. The air felt denser, harder to breathe, as if the very atmosphere was congealing around me. With a start, I realized my reflected breath didn't miss the glass. Panic, icy and sharp, clawed at my chest. I exhaled deliberately, watching closely. Nothing. The surface of the mirror remained clear, mocking. My mind raced, a whirlpool of confusion and fear. This wasn't right. Mirrors fogged up with breath. They had to. Clenching my teeth, I resisted the urge to smash the glass, intangible warnings holding my actions in check. The room's temperature dropped further. It was then I noticed it, the faintest outline of frost creeping across the lower corner of the mirror. "No," I whispered to no one, my voice cracking. My reflection mimicked the movement perfectly, yet something intangible felt off. My movements seemed slower in the mirror, or perhaps more reluctant. Fear twisted my gut as my brain struggled to deny what my eyes confessed. Then the air shifted again, a whisper of movement. My head snapped to the side, towards the door, but then back to the mirror where my reflection had already turned back to face front. But I hadn't moved, not like that, not yet. My breath hitched, and for a split second, I saw in the mirror not just one of me but two, myself and a darker, shadowed version overlapping. Blinking hard, I shook my head. Was this madness? Was I hallucinating? In the bitter silence, the softest scrape sounded behind the door, like nails on wood, deliberate and slow. My heart froze, then thudded painfully. The noise grew louder, more insistent, as if something clawed to get out, or in. Behind me, the door's handle jiggled slightly, a tiny but horrifying promise of what might come. Frozen, I faced the mirror again, my eyes drawn inexorably to it. In the dim light, my reflection stood stark and trembling. Only now, behind the slightly swaying figure of myself, the door in the reflection started to creak open. My breath caught as the real door remained firmly shut. Nausea swirled within me as I stared into the mirror, transfixed by the impossible. The reflected door opened further, and an impossibly long, pale hand curled around the edge. My mouth opened in a silent scream, but the sound that finally broke the silence wasn't mine. It was a low, hungry growl, hollow as the grave, echoing not from behind me, but from the depths of the mirror itself. Did it maintain escalation and atmosphere? Keep the elements grounded and unnervingly personal? I aim to provide a cohesive continuation of your story, highlighting those chilling details. As the night grew denser around my little house at the edge of the woods, so too did the shadows in the corners of each room, accumulating like silt in a stagnant pond. This evening, there was a strange electricity in the air, a kind of static buzz that made the fine hairs on my arms stand at attention. It was as if the atmosphere itself was charged with a premonition, though of what, I couldn't say. At first, I thought the flickering lights were merely the result of poor wiring, an old house's way of showing its age. But when the bulbs in the kitchen began to sputter and die, one by one, as though a shadowy hand were methodically unscrewing them from their sockets, I felt a deep, sickly dread pool in my stomach. I replaced the bulbs, good, new bulbs, yet within minutes they dimmed, flickered, and died like the last beats of a heart. It wasn't just the light in the house. Even the street lamps outside the window seemed to flicker in sympathy. I peered out into the darkness, my breath fogging the cold glass of the window pane. The night seemed impenetrable, a thick swath of blackness, and yet I felt observed, watched by an unblinking eye that I could not see. Something moved just beyond the glass, a quick, shivering motion like that of a startled animal. I froze, my eyes straining to see more, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, a febrile trick of my imagination, perhaps, fueled by the growing unease curling inside my chest. I tried to dismiss it, tried to convince myself it was nothing, but memories surged unbidden. Memories of childhood, of the bone-deep cold I felt when I thought there were monsters under my bed, the fear that gripped me when shadows played across my bedroom walls, created by nothing more menacing than the branches of the old tree outside my window. Back then, the explanation was simple. It was all in my head, but what if it wasn't? That night, the house seemed unwilling to sleep, groaning and settling with more agitation than the wind could account for. It felt as if the house itself sensed what perhaps I did not want to acknowledge, that something malevolent was at play. In an attempt to calm myself, I decided to make tea, a mundane task to distract my spiraling thoughts. The kitchen felt colder than usual as I filled the kettle with water. The tap's usual chorus, gurgling pipes and hiss of water, had been lost to a sill. Instead, that made my ears ring. Or perhaps it was not silence at all, but a faint whisper, the sound of something breathing, slow and ragged, just on the other side of reality. It wasn't until I turned to place the kettle on the stove that I saw it directly. A transient shadow, denser than the surrounding gloom, slipping silently along the hallway wall. My heart quickened, thundering against my ribs as though it too sought escape from what my eyes refused to comprehend. I blinked rapidly, hoping to clear this visual aberration, but when my eyes refocused, the shadow was distinctly nearer, its form sharper, yet no less intangible. Gripping the edge of the counter, I mentally chastised myself. It was just shifting light, nothing more. The house was playing tricks with the shadows, wasn't it? Yet, I couldn't convince my trembling hands or my shallow, rapid breaths that believed otherwise. The electric kettle had begun to whistle, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to pierce the veil of my dread. As I reached out to flick the switch, a sudden cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the small flame under the kettle with a soft, spiteful hiss. The whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by a more ominous silence. A silence filled, somehow, with a palpable breath, a sigh so subtle yet so close it might have been whispered directly against my ear. My neck hairs bristled, and I dared not turn around, paralyzed by the thought of what might be manifesting just beyond my peripheral vision. The darkness felt denser, as though the shadows were drawing in, tightening around me like a noose. A soft scrape, like the sound of a foot dragging across an unyielding floor, echoed down the hallway, deliberate and slow, drawing closer. I should have moved, should have run, but fear anchored me in place, ineffective and captivated. As the sound approached, ceaseless as a tide, it seemed almost a prelude to something yet unnamed, a harbinger of darker things to come, so close now that I could almost anticipate what horror might next be revealed in the dimming light of my flickering sanctuary.